Today is Wednesday, March 25th, 2025. My name is Ella Hicks, and I'm interviewing Benny Aleman Jr. in Austin, Texas for the Voces Oral History Center. We are at the University of Texas at Austin campus. Thank you, Mr. Aleman, for agreeing to this interview and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, the raw, unedited recording of this interview will be archived at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection on the University of Texas at Austin campus, where it will be available to anyone who wishes to access it. If there is anything you would like to not talk about, we respect your wishes. Also, if there is anything in particular you want to discuss, please make sure we discuss it in length. Please let us know if we need to pause the interview. Today, we are going to talk about your life experiences serving in the Vietnam War in the aviation and infantry divisions. As a part of this, we will also discuss your training, station locations, missions you went on, personal anecdotes, and your reflection of the war as it stood back then and how you look at the war now. And if you are ready, Mr. Aleman, let's begin with how it all started.
Okay.
Tell me about growing up. Where were you born and where were your parents born?
My parents were born in a little town. My mother grew up in a little town called Taft, Texas, right outside Corpus Christi. Married my dad. We grew up in a little shack there in Corpus Christi, the West Side, what they call the West Side. I was born there in 1948, and I had, besides me, there's 5 more brothers and 8 sisters, and we grew up in a tiny little house there. But of course, we were all, back then we were all a bunch of cotton pickers, so that's why families were, the size of the family depended on whether they were going to eat or not, So during the summer, all of us picked cotton to be able to buy our clothes for school, for the winter and stuff, and stock up on food and stuff like that. And that was, naturally, it was just me. I think the entire west side of Corpus Christi was the same way as us, So, we didn't know what poor was because everybody was poor. So, but it's a good experience. It made you value life a little bit.
Describe the neighborhood and/or home that you grew up in.
Like I indicated to you, I lived in a shack, and a matter of fact, I did enclose a picture of it in there so you guys can see it. Me and my brother standing in front of that little shack before we tore it down. But it was just a one-room house. It had a combination living room, bedroom. It had a little kitchen behind it, and then one little bathroom that my uncle and my dad had built right behind the school, behind the kitchen. But we didn't have a refrigerator. We had to put ice in it, and kind of like a cooler, But but in those days, that's the way it was, So, like I said, we weren't poor. Everybody was the same way. So,
Was there any encouragement at home or at school to join the military?
no, because nobody in my family ever joined the military except me. Not my father and my mother or my siblings. I was the only one. So I stayed in for almost 40 years. So because I put in my time for all of them.
What was the opinion of your peers and family members towards the draft?
Back in those days, politics was not discussed very much. Because there was a thing called a poll tax back then. That if you didn't buy a poll tax, paid your tax for the poll, then you could not vote even though you're an American citizen. So my parents were not going to spend their money on a poll tax, ticket or whatever it was, because they'd rather have it spent on food. So politically, we were never connected to anything. What will be, and that's the way it was. Changes came about later, but in those days it was like that, and there was not anything towards the draft. It was kind of never mentioned either. But if you got drafted, then you went. Nobody complained. I grew up in a street. There was over 50 boys, or 57 boys on the street where I grew up. Um, and all those boys, 37 of them went into the military, and 28 of us were in Vietnam. Amazing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Did you join the military via the draft system or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted. I couldn't wait. I wanted to. I had an ambition. I grew up close to an airport called Cliff Moss Airport in Corpus Christi, and the planes used to fly over my house all the time. And I was very interested on the cotton fields. We had a Navy training site there in Corpus Naval Air Station, and that the aviators there used to come from flying. They moved from Beeville to Corpus Christi to their second phase of their flight training. And standing down in the cotton fields, I used to watch them fly over and say, one day I'm going to do that. So that was my ambition, just to get out of there and go to. I wanted to be a helicopter mechanic, and that's what I became. It was.
How did your family and friends react to your decision to enlist?
Well, my dad was mad. My sister had just graduated from college down at Texas A&I in Kingsville. And in talking to her, she says, "You need to get out of here, and you need to go and get your career going." I said, "And you're right." I said, "I've been thinking about that." So my sister hauled me over to the recruiting office because I was underage. Of course, at that time you had to be 18. I was 17. I had dropped out of school, of course, and so I knew there was no future unless I went to the military and earned that right. So I said, well, college is going to be there, but I have to go to Vietnam first. So my dad was mad. He was besides himself because he said, the first place they're going to send you, you're going to send you to Vietnam. So be it, Dad. That's just the way it is. And so, but he finally relented. He signed, and so off I went.
I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you could pinpoint the moment that made you want to join the military, what and when was that moment?
Well, as I indicated earlier, I grew up with a bunch of military guys. They were all nowadays we refer to them as warmongers. Back there, since you grew up with a hood, you were used to defending yourself. So I don't know. Vietnam appeared on the picture, but we didn't think about whether we were going to make it home or not. I think we only lost 7. We lost 7 of the guys that went to school with me that were in the block. We lost 7 in Vietnam. 7 guys, in the Army and Marines. They grew up with my best friend. I lost my best friend there in Marine Corps. So we brought him and buried him in 1969. But it was we in the block understood that even though sometimes you felt like you were half a citizen, we're still warmongers. We want to defend this country one way or the other. That's what we did.
If you had not gone into the military, what path do you think your life might have taken?
I think it had been. I'd been in bad shape because I had already found a girlfriend. But she said she was my girlfriend. I didn't know that. She said that's what she indicated to me. But anyway, she was a friend, and we were pretty close. And of course, back in those days, my sister was so scared that I might get that girl pregnant. Mm-hmm. So she, get you out of here and send you to the military. Best move I ever made. I liked it there, and I still do. I still go all to parades. I belong to the VFW. I try to do a lot of things that has to do with the uniform, but because that's the way I grew up.
So now moving on to your background and leaving for training, describe the feeling of leaving home for training. What did that feel like?
Well, initially it was exhilarating because I knew I was going to leave the block, and I wanted to get away. But upon arriving, I'd never been in an airplane, but I knew what I wanted to do, and it was kind of scary. get on an airplane going to El Paso. I didn't fly back to Corpus to El Paso. It didn't take very long. But it was time we got there, and got on a bus, and they sent us to Fort Bliss. I had an awful awakening, when this guy's yelling at you. I was just not used to that, and the first thing was say, "Who the hell do you think you're talking to?" But you're in the military now, whether you've been drafted, whether you volunteered, you were there, and you had the standards to live by. And I told everybody this story. I liked it for one thing. First of all, you had a bed, you know, you had a mattress, you had a blanket, you had a pillow, nice crispy white sheets, and 3 meals a day. How could you beat that?
Where was your training, and what was the training base called?
The training was I was in a company called A1C Alpha Company, First Training Battalion and Third Training Brigade in Fort Bliss, in El Paso, and we had wonderful trainers, wonderful trainers. And sometimes you wonder, do you remember what people often ask you, do you remember who your first trainer was? Yep, I remember who my first trainer was. You can't forget them. It's kind of like, remember, when you get there, you have to memorize your serial number. The Army used to give you a serial number, not your social security number, a serial number, or to yourself. If you were a draftee, you started out with US. If you were a volunteer, you would say it was an RA, and then you have 8 numbers. And you had to remember those numbers, and the hardest thing was to remember all those numbers. But it was so embedded in your mind that you had to remember that. I mean, you had to yell these things every day, 5, 6, 7 times a day. So yeah, it was an eye opener.
During the training process. During the training process, were you automatically assigned to the infantry division, or was it a decision you got to make?
Well, see, no, the Army had said that I would be in aviation. I signed up to be an aviator. So from Fort Bliss, Texas, they flew me to Dothan, Alabama. We call it Mother Rucker. Fort Rucker, Alabama, and that's where the initial training is for all helicopter mechanics. And it was the secondary point for our pilots. They came from Fort Walters, Texas, to Alabama, and that's where they started their second phase of their pilot training. Where we initially learned, they trained us at the primary was the engines, the post engines that they use in airplanes. That's the first part of our training before we went to turbine schools. And then they taught us about the rotor heads and things of this nature. It was a little different. Now, right after I finished my training, I went to a petroleum school in a little university called Auburn University in Alabama. And they sent us to school there to and I kind of find it because I didn't want to be no refueler. I was going to be a helicopter mechanic / door gunner. And so they told me, since I already finished the gunnery phase of it, on the mounted guns on the helicopter, we've already finished that. And so they sent me to Auburn. In Auburn, I stayed there for a while and learned everything about the fuel. The JP, at that time, was JP4. Jet fuel for that we put on helicopters, and we were there with the rest of the students that were petroleum engineers, and we were learning about chemical makeup of all this stuff and all these other things. So we got through that particular phase. They sent me to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and at Fort Dix I was only there like maybe 3-4 days, and they put me on a big ship. They put us on a bus and took us to New York City. And in New York City, there was a big old Navy ship called the USS Maurice Rose. and they told us that we're going to put us on that ship and send us to Germany. And I said, oh boy, I never been to Germany. That's going to be wonderful. So, and I was kind of excited about that. So, finally got to Germany. I think it took us like 13 days across the ocean. And we got to Germany, Bremerhaven, Germany. And from there, I don't know, there was like 3,250 of us on that ship. So we always, Air Force and Army, and we all went our different ways. We had some Marines in there also. And we went our different ways. And got to a place called Stuttgart. That was going to be my headquarters there. And I signed my unit. They took me over, picked me up, took me over there. And I got to meet some of the people there and stuff like that. And when I was a young man, I learned to play drums in school when I was in the 7th grade. And me and this other guy always used to get together and drum. You know, we were just drummers. And we played the little band and stuff like that. You know, garage band. So we weren't out very much. But when I got to Germany, I've been there a few months, and I went to this club. I didn't drink at that time. I did want to drink because I thought my dad had set a bad example. You know, my daddy would drink a lot, and my older brothers did too. And I said, no, I'm not going to go, no part of that. So I was at the club, and I was drinking Cokes, and I was sitting next to another guy that was a musician for a band down in the valley. As a matter of fact, I think he's a bunch of brothers that had this band. And so I'm sitting next to him, and we're waiting for the band to come on. And there was a band from London. Well, somehow or another, their drummer didn't show up that day, so the manager for the club said, well, we're not going to have any music tonight because our drummer's not here, and nobody else is here can perform stuff. So he says, we're not going to have anything tonight. And he kept elbowing me. I said, what do you do? He said, well, tell him you can drum for him. The drums were up there already. So I raised my hand and I said, well, you know, I play drums. He said, okay. So I got up there and I talked to the leader of the band, and he says, well, have you ever played a song called, I can't remember the name of that song, just song about New Orleans, City of New Orleans, I think it was. And I said, yeah, I've heard about it. He said, you think you can play that song? I said, of course, you know, I play rock and roll. Oh, okay, well. So I gave him a little demonstration, and he says, yeah, you'll do. He says, you know what, we only paid $25. $25 was a lot of money. You know? I said, okay. So we started doing that and having a lot of fun, you know. Then the other guy, I think he showed up once, and he was mad at it because he hadn't showed up. So he asked me if the next weekend I could drum. I said, well, I don't know. It depends on if we're going to the field or not. And he said, well, ask your first sergeant. I said, all right. So I asked the first sergeant. I said, well, we ain't got nothing going on. He says, you can stay. Well, we had bed check. We had to be in bed by 11:30. But see, the club stayed open until 12. So I had to get special permission to stay late. But it worked out. But he knew I didn't drink, so he didn't have no problem with me. And it was just walking distance from the barracks. It was just a little club, and we had a little canteen, and we had a little laundry. And our headquarters for the 7th Army headquarters was there. So it wasn't a very big, it was at airfield, is where it was. Echterdingen Army Airfield. It was at the Stuttgart main airport, but on the other side. Well, lo and behold, we're there about a year, having fun. And man, I was enjoying myself. I found some little gal out there that hung around me all the time. and I said, oh man. And one day they just called 5 of us to the first sergeant's office and said, oh, what did we do? Where are we going? What's the problem? He said, well, we'll find out when we get there. So, and I asked my friend Quinn, I said, Quinn, what did you do? Did you get drunk again last night? I didn't even drink last night. So I was always, you know, accusing him of getting drunk and messing things up. So we got to the first sergeant's office. He says, congratulations. Okay. So what do we do? He says, you guys got to leave here tomorrow. Where we going, Tom? All of y'all going to Vietnam. And I go like, tomorrow? I had bought a little 1956 Volkswagen. Uh, and I said, well, and he said, but we're going to have to, and our headquarters is pretty far away. So they had to take us there in a big old deuce and a half. And it takes forever to get from one place, in Germany, because at that time, the winding roads, So he said, but I'll help you by assigning somebody to help you guys load all your stuff. Oh man, okay. Then I had to sell my car, and then well, I never got a chance to even say bye to that little gal because it was on like a Tuesday when we left there, and she didn't come back until Friday night because she was in school. She was gonna be a nurse, and so we left there and wound up in Vietnam. No, we went to Oakland, California, and from Oakland, California, they shipped us to Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. That was January of 1967. And we got there, and you wait there, and they put you to work. What we call a shit burning detail. That's what we did. What you call the pack deck now. That's what we called it back then. And sorry about the language, but that's what we did. And because there's a whole bunch of us there. So finally, they called me one day and told me, "Hey, we got orders for you. You can go to see helicopter pad number such and such." I said, "Okay." I went there, and he said, "You're going to go to your unit of assignment." Fantastic. I said, "All right. Where am I going?" So he took us to this place. I don't know, it took about an hour to get there. And it dropped us off at this helipad. And the helicopter took off. And here comes one guy marched up the road through the not the mangroves, but the elephant grass. And he said, "Okay, you guys come with me. I'll take you to the first sergeant." I said, "Okay." So we went over there and got to a tent. And the tent was the first sergeant sitting in there. And so he says, "Okay, who's first here?" He said, "Aleman, you first." "Yes, I'm here, Top." "Okay." So he started going through my record and he started filling out some paperwork. I said, "Top, where are the helicopters at?" He says, "There ain't no helicopters here." "Really?" I said, well, what unit is this? This is the big red one, the 1st Infantry Division. "Okay." I said, but I said, "Top, must be some mistake because I'm an aviator. I'm a 6'7" November." He said, "Hold on." He looked up. He said, "Did you go to gunnery school?" I said, "I went to helicopter gunnery school in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and at Fort Benning, Georgia." "Yep." "You're the right one." He says, "But that's the 11 Delta, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's 11 Delta." He said, "Well, you wound up here because we need 11 Deltas." I said, "Well, I thought I was supposed to be aviation." He said, "Well, not right now, you're not. You're going to be infantry." At that time, I said, "Well," and I said, "Quinn." He said, "Well, Top, I'm not I'm not an infantry guy." He said, "They sent me over here." We didn't know what was going on. So I said, "Okay, we're going to be here. We're going to be here. Nothing we can do. We're stuck here. And what can you say? We'll be here for a year. That's all there's to it." So they told us they were going to give us our equipment, or issue our M16s and our grenade launcher. And they gave me a machine gun, an M60. And I said, "Okay." So they gave us some jungle fatigue stuff. Assigned us to a platoon sergeant. And it was all going good, but it took about a couple of days to get all that done. But I was still curious about why they sent me to an infantry unit when I was aviation. Because I came from Germany, and I was an aviator in Germany. We were flying into France, picking up helicopter parts, coming back. And I was working on helicopters there, and I flew as a crew chief in Germany. But when I got to Vietnam, I had to be an infantry. And that bothered me for many, many, many years, until I went to my first reunion for my battalion. And I asked the first sergeant, "Tom, why did I wind up as an 11 Bush?" I said, "When I went to 6-7 November school and all that." He says, well, I'm going to explain it to you. And he says, what happened was that you belong to the 34th Drill Support Group, okay, which also owns the 14th Transportation Battalion. So, okay, there was no aviation then. We belong to the Transportation Corps. He said, so our main units of support was the 1st Cav, 1st Infantry, and the 4th Infantry Division. He says, that's the reason why you wind up in the Big Red One, because when they call, you know, we got so many coming in, they call us and says, we need 20, we send 20. And some of them get lucky, stay here, and some don't. I said, gee, I never knew that, Top. I said, I didn't know that they did those guys. He said, that's exactly what they did, and that's why you wound up there, you and Quinn. I said, well, that's all right. Now, not a problem. I said, I was just curious. And this was like 25 some of years later when he told me that. And I said, oh, wow, how it, but it was beneficial in the later years that I spent that year there with him, because you learn a lot from there. You learn, we as soldiers learn a lot of things, but infantrymen, they learn how to read a compass. They know about the 3 magnetic norths. They know how to read a map. They know how to navigate at night. So a lot of those things came in handy in the later years as a first sergeant, because I was able to train my soldiers. They were aviators. They worked on helicopters, but they weren't very good at doing infantry tactics. And everybody in the Army is an infantry first. I don't care if you're a band member or you belong to the military, police. I don't care if you're the intelligence agent. You're still going to be, first of all, you're going to be 11 Bush. You're going to be an infantry soldier. And so in later years it worked out, and I'm glad that happened. I was very disappointed because I thought because I was brown, they're going to send me to the infantry. And I was kind of mad about that because I'd worked hard to be a helicopter mechanic, and learn all of that. Take engines apart, turbine engines. And I was only 18 years old. And so that was something that was very beneficial to me. In later years, turned out to be a blessing.
What are some of the key skills, physical and mental, that you need to excel in the infantry? And what are some of the key skills you need to have to excel in helicopter crews as a crew chief?
In the infantry, you move by foot. Everything's by foot, unless you got ways to go 2 or 3 Ks. They'll come in, and if you're going 3 or 4 clicks down the road, they'll come pick you up a helicopter and take you. We were I was assigned to an infantry company, the company C of the 116th Battalion of the 1st Infantry Division. And that was it was 42 miles, I think, north of Saigon, in a place called the Iron Triangle. Now, this is what we did. I didn't think it was right then. I don't think it's right now. The place that we were guarding was a kind of triangle, kind of like this, and there was a little place here called Fuloy, and Fuloy is where the infantry was. You go up here, further was the headquarters, about 40 miles away, maybe 20 miles away, was the headquarters for the Big Red One. Our job was to guard this plantation, Michelin rubber plantations, because the VC at night would come over and try to steal some of the rubber buckets that came from the rubber that came on, the little buckets that collected all the rubber from the trees. At night, they try to come in there and take that rubber for them, but it belonged to the French. Now, you tell me, I don't know why. Nobody ever answered this question to me. Why were we protecting something that belonged to the French? Nobody's able to answer that, but we did. I mean, some people died not knowing why we did that, but we did. And it's a 24-hour operation. You go in there and into the field 13 days and come back and take a bath and change clothes and go again. It's a little bit different from aviation because there's only two of you and at a checkpoint or any time or an LP. I can't remember all the wording anymore. We have the lookout point and all this stuff, and you just sit there and you just wait, and you get some insurgents, well, you know what to do, and just keep the machine covered so we won't get wet and stuff. And you sit there in the rain. If it's raining, oh well, it's raining. It's nothing you can do. But that's what we did in the infantry, but that's just the way it is. You had hellacious firefights. And lucky for us, we wound up good. We came back. There was some that did not, but that's the way it is. In the aviation, it's a little bit different. See, because in the infantry, you're out there at night by yourself, and you can't wait for the sun to come up because it's cold, it's raining, you got your poncho on, and you're all wet, and it's ugly, and you're waiting for the sun to come up, and then the sun comes up, and it gets all wet from all the stuff. It's just kind of a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again. It doesn't take very long, and it's just a little bit miserable. Helicopters are a totally different world. We fly somewhere and go do our job and come back. And so, lucky for me, I told First Sergeant that when he interviewed me for, they were going to send me to the First Infantry Division in Missouri, or Kansas. I think I was going to Kansas. I can't remember where I was going. But they were going to assign me there, and I told Top, no, I don't want to go there, Top. He said, well, you want to come back for a year? I said, I don't want to come back here for a year. He said, well, you want me to send you aviation? I said, you send me the aviation, I'll come back. I'll sign the extension. He said, okay. And that was a feather in his hat if he had you do that. So that's what I did. I extended for another year, came home on leave, and went back. And they sent me to an aviation unit. Today, I still hang around with those guys. Every 2 years, we have a reunion somewhere in the United States. And there's about 200 of us and our spouses and the girlfriends or whatever. And we all just go enjoy, have a good time 4 or 5 days. And it's a lot of fun. So we go lots of different places. I've been to Reno. We've been from coast to coast. And it's an enjoyable experience. And I still hang around those guys today. And that's some of them.
Can you describe to me what the schedule was like for you going through training, both as in the infantry and helicopter cruise division?
Well, infantry training, formally, I never had formal infantry training, but like I tell you, the formal infantry part is part of your basic training when you go. At that time was 2 months. You go basic training for 2 months. And you learn all the infantry skills because that's where you have to be a soldier first before you go into your secondary. So it was hard to learn all those things. Not only you had the mental and then you had the physical part of it. The mental part was for a person like me that came from the block, I never knew what a map was. But in the infantry, they give you a map and they give you a compass. And they said, okay, I want you to go from point A to point B. And you report to us when you get there and you're going like, huh? And in El Paso, sand dunes, not too many trees, not too many lakes. And it was difficult. And it's all sand, so it's really hard to walk on. But once you got past that stage and that fright and you understand what you were looking at and which way you had to go. Then, when you got to aviation, you already knew all the skills of what it was to be a soldier. Now you're going to learn another set of skills. It's kind of like high school and college, you know. It's almost the same, but it's not the same. It's a little bit harder going to college. And so, you know, we got to aviation training. And, you know, we all those soldiers kind of they support each other. They're very supportive of each other. You take sessions like, and these other guys, they don't want you to fail because you're part of their team. So if it takes somebody to help you get past that, there's always a volunteer that says, I'll take care of it. You know, I'll help you get by. I'll teach you what you can't understand and stuff like that. So the most difficult part, I think, was for Eastern Virginia going through the engine training because that's a jet engine, you know, internal, you know, not internal combustion. Well, it is internal combustion, but it's a little different. It's a turbine engine, you know, and it's a jet engine, but it's got a drive shaft to it that drives something else instead of propulsion. Uh, so you had to make yourself aware of all these changing things that you were not used to on the block. And in a matter of, if you go from being on the block and being just a boy on the block, with the rest hanging around with the rest of the guys, and then 4 months later you're over here, which makes you totally different from these guys, you know, because this guy's never left for the military yet, and yet you're already learning how to start an engine, you know, and shut it down and check and see what's wrong with it, and it's pretty terrifying at times, but it's okay. You learn it. Sooner or later, you'll learn it, and with the help of the other soldiers, you help them and they help you, and we all got through it real good.
That brings me to my next question. Could you please explain to me the technical aspects of flying and what you had to learn to master those?
I think the hardest aspect of learning how to fly is intercepting a horizon. Um, a lot of people, when you first start flying, you you have to trust when you're sitting in the aircraft. You got, you know, two pedals, and in an airplane you got a yoke, or in a Huey you had a stick, and you had a collective, a cyclic stick and a collective. This one makes you go up and down. This one turns you sideways or wherever you want to go, and this pedal keeps your nose going this way. You know, the hardest thing about learning, the first thing that teach you how to fly is learning how to hover a helicopter. Now I'm not talking about. I didn't become an aviator until after I was a student in college. I was always interested in flying, but I couldn't afford it. But I bought an airplane and I learned to fly a little airplane, a Cessna 150, and I owned that thing. So, but learning how to fly the helicopter is a little different than an airplane. Very different. Um, Airplanes got a yoke, so, and you kind of steer like a car. This was a stick. The hardest part is looking out the horizon, trusting your butt. You know that the helicopter's moving up and down it, but you make minute movements. You know, a lot of people just get all excited and they go all over the place and they're rocking back and forth. We call it a yo-yo. You know, up and down and stuff, because it takes a little time to learn how minutely move your pedals. When you pick up the collective stick, you know, the nose of the aircraft is going to want to turn left, so you got to give it right pedal. When you go down, you got to give it left pedal. And if you move this thing forward, go like this, then the aircraft's going to tend to go this way. So you have to hit the right pedal and go this way. Now, trick to all that is have a little thing right here, an instrument called what do you call that thing? Oh, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, not a turn and bank indicator. I can't remember the name of it. A needle ball. We called it a needle ball. It's a little black thing inside. And if you can't feel the aircraft flying, you just look at the needle ball and see if you got to move the ball to the right, then you hit the left pedal. You got to move it to the left, you hit the opposite pedal. So that's how you keep your nose facing that way. In other words, but another thing is you got to compensate for the wind, where the wind's coming from. It's from the back, the side, the quarter. So, but you start feeling that as you learn to fly. But the hardest part of flying is hovering. Hovering is it's a trick. But one guy told me one time, he's a pilot, um, Lynn Kennedy from Austin, Texas, but he was working in Louisiana. But he was born and reared here in Austin, went to Johnston High School. A real aviator. I mean, this guy was a dyed-in-the-wool helicopter pilot, Vietnam vet. I think he was there like 3 times. Lynn was the guy who would teach you how to fly. First, you started on the little helicopter, the loach, what we call a loach. And one day he was teaching this guy named Tom Benedict how to hover. And Tom was a little hard-headed. It was Washington State, so and Lynn was hanging his feet out the side of the aircraft. They got no doors, right? They took the doors off. He's hanging the doors in, and he's yelling through the mic, "We're gonna crash! We're gonna crash!" And Tom is all over the place. and it was kind of funny, but that's the way Lynn taught you how to fly. You go do it by yourself. I don't get, and he wasn't scared that he was gonna let you crash, but. That's how you learn. But you had guys like Lynn, they were there in Vietnam that taught us crew chiefs how to fly, because just in case there was an emergency, you were there to help him. Because back in those days there weren't very many pilots. We were short many aviators. They were pushing them to school, but one guy told me one time, he said, "Hey, you can stand in front of a mirror and go." And he fogged it up, then you were a pilot. and probably was true, because I did meet with one of those guys that never learned how to fly. Poor guy's deceased now, but golly, that he scared the dog tickens out of me. Because he was a pilot, but he just couldn't fly. I had to. When they put me in with him one day, and I told him, I said, "You don't know how to fly out of this revetment? I'll show you how to do it, because it's a trick to all this." "Oh, I've done it before." I said, "Okay." Oh, I'll never forget that day. He just in the revetment is in Vietnam. You park your helicopter in a revetment to keep the mortar rounds and the rockets from hitting the ground and you're putting holes in your helicopter, with the shrapnel. So you put them in between, you put them in revetments, and these are all just 55-gallon barrels full of sand. And they got sandbags on top of that. And he picked it up every and knew he was wrong. And I said, put it back down, put it down. Sticks and put it down. So he put it down. And I said, "Are you sure you've done this before?" He said, "I'll do it." I said, "Well, that was not very good." I said, "You remember what you do in ITO?" And he said, "Well, I know how to do an ITO." I said, "Well," I said, "You sure?" "Yeah." He picked it up, and naturally, he wasn't very good, but we didn't have any pilots. And we were going through an operation. I said, "Let me get it out of here." And I said, "I'll put it out there in the taxiway for you." He said, "Okay." So I did an ITO off of there and set it down over there. And I said, "Don't ever do that again. I guess we're going to find out not only me are you going to be gone, but the guys behind us are going to be gone too." He said, "Well, I'm sorry. I just got out there." But he stayed there for maybe a year with us. He could not pass his check rights, so the Army had to release him but we took him. He was a record driver in the Army when we got him, and he was from somewhere in Alabama. It was one aviator. See, but that's what I'm saying. Some guys became warrant officers, went to warrant officer training school and became aviators. But when they got to the field, they were really good aviators, because they had some crew chiefs that could outfly those guys, because those crew chiefs have been flying for a couple of years over there. So they were just like pilots. They talk on the radio, they fly the helicopter. And they call them flying sergeants. That's what they call me. Me and John Lawrence, guy out of Houston, one of my buddies. That's what they call us, the flying sergeants.
So what does the crew chief do? I know you talked briefly about
A
this, but
crew chief,
specifically.
as a crew chief, you're responsible for the aircraft. Pilot gets in the aircraft, flies, comes back, sets it down. You're responsible, you and most of them the gunner, are responsible for the maintenance of the aircraft. You got to refuel it. First of all, that's what you got to do. The bugs in the windshield, you clean the windshield. You check the blades, make sure no stray bullets got in there. You check the skids, make sure everything's good. Check the body, the airframe. You do after you get. Then you have to take off the guns, and then you have to secure the guns. You have to clean them and everything. You hold them for the next day or the afternoon, whatever. And we had a big old box. You had a key to. You go in there and you put your weapons in there and all your ammo and stuff, and you close up the aircraft. But in the morning, you get a briefing, or at night you get a briefing and say, well, in the morning we're going to leave 0600. It's going to be aircraft 292 or chalk, 134 or whatever it is. And said, okay. So in your mind, you already know you're the crew chief. You got to make sure that your gunner gets up, make sure we get ready to go, have the guns installed on the aircraft and everything else. By the time they tell you the briefing is going to be at 0700. So at 0700, you got to be in this operations center, because then they're going to give you where you're going. They give you the flight number, how many aircraft in the flight and stuff like that. When you're flying Chalk 3, Chalk 4, stuff like that. But that's crew chief responsibility, and you're responsible for the gunner also. So, but a lot of times we only have one pilot per aircraft. So the crew chief became the co-pilot, the fly in the left seat, and the gunner was normally going to be the gunner on the left side. So normally you wouldn't, if that condition occurred, and what was your job was to go out there and find you somebody like that worked the engine shop, see if they want to go flying as a gunner for you that day. So you just put up a helmet on and put up a chicken plate on. You know what a chicken plate is, the armor plates that you sit on. Get them a chicken plate, let's go, so that's the way we did things. So yeah, that's what the crew chief duties were: maintain that aircraft.
Who were some of the first friendships that you made in the military?
Some of the friendships?
Some of the first ones.
Well, in the later years, initially, you make friends, but till you move, or they moved, or you moved around. So, you be at one company, then you go to another company or another battalion and stuff like that. So you made friends, but not real close friends. I made a real close friend on my second trip to Vietnam. I went with a guy named John Lawrence, and he was out of Houston, and a guy named Art Harrison, who I still hang around with. He's from Michigan, and so I'm from Ohio. He's from Ohio, and I still keep in touch with those guys. Those two guys they were crew chiefs with me. Harrison was already there by the time I got there, and we just became real good friends. I had a friend that came later. His daddy was a Marine, a Sergeant First Class Marine. When we were in Vietnam, his daddy came to visit us. He was there too, and we called him Missy. And Missy, because he was kind of a little bit scared of the job and things like that. He was a gunner, and so he was kind of introvert. Years later, many years, 30 years later, I ran into Missy. Well, Missy became the vice president of a company that does. It was one of the first companies that came out with the security alarms for the houses. I can't remember the exact name of the company. It was in Pennsylvania. Another guy that I used to fly with on the Lochis when we were younger, his name was Robert Kirksey. Saw Robert Kirksey in Hampton, Virginia. We went to our reunion. And I introduced him to my wife and to my sister-in-law, because they were with me, and they were looking at Robert, and Robert's African American, well, we used to call him white, bright, damn near white. You know, we were very, very light complected black guy with green eyes, and had a little bit of kinky hair, but it was kind of wavy hair. It was brown. In later years, Mr. Crutcher retired from the Army after 30 years and became the chief pilot for Oprah Winfrey. So, yeah, you make a lot of friends. Absolutely.
How many other Latinos did you meet in training school and in the military, kind of all together? What was that like?
How many what?
How many other Latinos did you meet in training school?
I, I didn't keep up with that. I don't know. Maybe, and maybe I should have. When I was in Fuloy, there was one guy that was from Corpus Christi also that went to school with my sisters. I've tried to keep in touch with him several times, invited him to different functions, but he's never responded. But we were together. Another one was a Hispanic guy who went with me with aviation school in Alabama. There was only two of us there, and he was, and there were no black guys, no women. Only two of us there at the time when I was at school, and his daddy owned trash company there in Corpus Christi. But we left Alabama. I lost track of him. I don't know where he went. I never found him again. I never looked for him. Of course, there's some that looked for me. I had 4 Latino friends in Vietnam that I see them every now and then. One of them has since passed away, San Antonio, but he was from El Paso. The other Willie was from New Mexico, and Joe was from Deming, New Mexico. And we got together in El Paso because I had made Command Sergeant Major. They found out, somehow or another, somebody had told them that I had gotten killed in Vietnam on my second trip. So they were trying to find me. They couldn't find me, but they found one of them found my sister. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Oscar Lopez. Found my sister in Corpus, and my sister wouldn't give him my number. But he says, I'll call him. You give me your number, I'll call you. So they gave me the number, and I had just made Command Sergeant Major. And I told them, and they got all excited because I made CSM. I said, oh my God, how did you do that? I don't know, it just happened. So we had a little reunion with our wives in El Paso, and we made there for the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So it was really nice. But those are about the only ones that I kept up with as far as Latinos. Because I was always Army. To me, it just didn't matter what, most of my friends were white guys, okay? Because, be truthful with you, there were very few Latinos that were aviation. Very few of us. Simply because it was very, very hard to pass all those tests if you were... I knew a little bit about mechanics because my daddy was an auto mechanic. So I learned how to take engines apart, put them together when I was young. Some of the guys had never seen that they could have made it through this training. It was very difficult. And a lot of us were not high school graduates. And some that were even high school graduates, even some of those guys had one heck of a time being aviation. They would go into the airborne, or the infantry, or they become cooks, things like that. But not aviation, because you had to take a test to be able to go to aviation school. And if you couldn't pass that test, you couldn't go. So how I passed it with an 8th grade education, I have no idea. But I passed.
What did you think Vietnam would look like or be like before you got there? Describe a few first impressions you had with Vietnam.
Vietnam, believe it or not, was a beautiful place. But we tore it up pretty bad. They're very honorable people. And I'm talking about South Vietnamese. the people were super nice. They were not aggressive. A few segment, no different than the hoodies nowadays or the Hamas, that's kind of what they had. They were not, how should I say, an aggressive kind of people. They just want to be left alone and be farmers or whatever they'll have out there, the rice fields. And, they would use oxen, to do the rice fields and stuff like that. Very primitive kind of people. And they couldn't speak English and stuff, but I got annoyed because some of the people would make fun of them, and that bothered me because, hey, shouldn't do that. But they were good people. You had in my second trip, I had a mama-san. Do they call it mama-san? And mama-san would, because the Seabees came in there and built us a building with screens so the mosquitoes won't come in and stuff, and they're made out of wood, and they were brand new, and they had lights and stuff, so it was nice. So Mama-san would come, and in the morning, and she would gather up. Some days she would do this, guys, and wash all their clothes, and next day she would come and do the other part, and they were 2-story. And most of the guys were all aviation, all mechanics and crew chiefs and stuff. And so, we got to joke with them a lot and stuff. And after you become friends with them, they're just like any other folk. I mean, no different. They joke and everything else, and they laugh and stuff. And then they bring some food, and you want to try it? I said, I don't look really good. Let me try it anyway. But yeah, very primitive. But I think they were very, very nice, with the exception of our communist forces, because they're no different than what we have today. A segment of that population that they thought, well, the North will be better, than the South, and they want everybody to be a communist. Well, you see what happened today. My nephew is a petroleum engineer from UT. Went to Vietnam to do some oil drilling in Vietnam when they became one country, to explore the possibility of oil rigs in North Vietnam. Well, he met a girl there, and then he wanted to get married, a Vietnamese girl. And he kind of was interested in me going back to Vietnam to his wedding. And he was going to Hanoi. Not moi. I said, sorry, nephew. I said, but you know what? You come back, bring it to the States. I said, you want to have a wedding here, I will help you. But I am not going back to Vietnam. I said, I don't want to see that place again. It was a demise for a lot of my friends. Their names are on the wall. And I ain't got no use to go to North Vietnam again. Now, some of the guys that belonged to the 14th Trans Battalion, my last unit there, because we were 10 companies in that battalion. Some of them had gone back, and Quackenbush, who was new in Syracuse, said, well, he said, Benny, I'm going to put on a trip, and we're going to go. I ain't going to Vietnam. You go ahead. You go by yourself. Get somebody to go with you. They got about 5 or 6 of them that went back, and he brought pictures. He says, you remember where we used to play drums at? I said, yeah, it's a little place a little club for me and Kirksey, Oprah Winfrey's pilot. He played the guitar. And there was another guy. I can't never remember his name. And to this day, I see his picture. I know exactly who he is, but I can't remember his name. But he played bass, and I played drums. And then another guy, kind of a country guy, hair kind of like Jerry Lee Lewis. He looked like Jerry Lee Lewis. And he played the guitar. And so we played for the soldiers there in the little corner. We just gather our stuff there. And we got all the stuff from the Air Force. The Air Force has all that stuff. We didn't have nothing. So we traded stuff for them, and they gave us the instruments. Except for Mr. Kirk, he brought his own guitar, and we played for the troops there, in Vietnam. so, we found ways to entertain ourselves, and like I say, but it's a little bit different, because if we were in Vietnam, we don't have to worry about what somebody's race was, or where they were. I had a guy named Davis from Oklahoma. Well, I thought it was Hispanic. He was Indian, but but he speaks Spanish. He was some of the Pueblo tribe or somebody. But heck of a nice guy. So, but over there, nobody ever questioned that. Especially in Vietnam, nobody asked. Nobody cared about where you come from, what you did and stuff. We were all there together as a team, so we all going to live together. So I think that's one of why I stayed in the Army. I said, what? I thought it was pretty good. I thought maybe I'd go to college and do something different, but nah.
Where were you stationed in Vietnam? Both tours.
I was stationed in a place called Phu Loy. Like I told you, it's only about 40 miles north of Saigon in the Iron Triangle. And from there, I transferred to a place called Quy Nhon. Now, when I went to Quy Nhon, I was already a crew chief. So, since I belonged to a support battalion, sometimes they would send me. I went to a place, when I first got there, I was there for not even a month, and they sent me to a place called Duc Pho, going north towards Chu Lai. And in Duc Pho, they got rocketed real bad and wiped out a whole tent. And so there were short mechanics, and there were short crew chiefs. So they called us, and I don't know who they called in my unit, but my unit was responsible for going to support them. So I was one of those that went over there to be a crew chief for a little while. We only stayed like 3 weeks and back. And then they would send us to the first calf at An, a place called An in Pleiku. And then they would send us over there and back. Sometimes I see you up to Da Nang and bring you back. So after the first 3 months, I did that. And then the first sergeant told me, since I wasn't going to do that anymore. He said, I'm going to keep you here. He said, because I expect you to take over this platoon. Okay. So that's what happened. I essentially became the boss there, and in Quy Nhon. I didn't leave there until I came back home.
What were your first combat missions like?
Scary. Scary. You're terrified. You know what to do, and people don't know this, but you got a natural instinct to defend yourself. That just comes naturally, But yeah, there is some terrifying moments where you don't know which way is up or down, and you got to be able to execute in order to survive. And once you get, it's kind of like a big flush. You're just going like, something's coming at you and you're holding your breath and you're frozen. You got to get out of that mindset, and you got to get it quick. But I think, I'm not going to say everybody, but most guys, I think, that go through that, the first part of it is very, very scary, because you don't know how to execute. You're frozen, and you start trembling and stuff. But it doesn't take very long for you to come out of that and say, I got to do what I got to do. So you start to defend yourself and your group, and there's a sergeant there always. It's an older sergeant that's been there before. And he knows what to do. So he's yelling at you, and because he knows that's going to happen. and I know now that's what's going to happen if I took my troops somewhere, I knew what I had to do, keep them fighting. But yeah, it's very scary.
What were the main types of missions that you carried out?
As far as I didn't do much. The,
Or ones that you were a part of?
well, the ones that I did initially was actually uh, mainly a listening post done in Fuloy at in the Iron Triangle, because it was a Michelin forest. Um, did that. The Going back to the aviation, we had insertions and extraction missions. Not so much with my support company, but when I went to the other units, that's what we did. The 164th was an assault helicopter company, and it was all gunships, kind of like Joe did. But Joe was there after I did, so Joe flew Cobras. When I was there, we didn't have Cobras. We had the UH-1C, Charlie model Huey, and he had a chunker in the front, and he had rocket pot, 7.62 rockets on the side, and he had 2 miniguns, and he had each side had a machine gun, and those were in the whole floor of the aircraft were nothing but ammo. I mean, it's stacked this high. So those are cover missions. When the infantry is being inserted, you fly cover for them, for the aircraft that are landing with the troops, and sometimes, like in the first CAF, you participated with them. That's what most of the CAF is what they did, is insertions and extractions, and what you would do, you fly cover for these guys. But when I went to work for them, all you do is man the machine gun. Well, those guys are jumping off the aircraft and you take off. Or if you go and pick them up, you go land and they jump in, and you make sure that that they're covered when they're jumping on the aircraft.
Do you still recall that checklist that you had before flying?
Yeah.
Did you have a checklist before you flew?
Yes, you have a checklist. You have a little green book like this. Everybody had a checklist. I know there's some guys that swear to God they fly by the book, but there's some that didn't. But it's like getting in your car. You get in your car, turn the air on, you turn the radio on and everything else, take off the brake, and you look around. Same thing you do, but an aircraft, you have to have a checklist that you have to follow. Even when you're starting up the aircraft, you have to have a checklist. Everybody uses a checklist. If you mess up, you better been using a checklist, because it's not hard to miss a switch. Fight number 1, turn the battery on. Battery's on. Item number 3, turn the inverter on. Turn the inverter on. All the instruments. So you cage the instruments. The artificial horizon and all this stuff. So there's a sequence of events that has to happen on the aircraft for the aircraft to be ready to fly. And then once you do all that, check the instruments, then you roll the throttle in. And you're telling the pilot, you're going through the checklist, okay, and you're reading everything to him, and he's doing, okay, done, check, done that, okay, yep, it's a number 2, you're good, all right. So there we go, and that's the checklist that we follow. So then we try to look around, and everything's good, all right, let's go. So you ask the crew chief back there or the gunner back there and said, hey, we guys clear? Yeah, we're clear. All right, let's go. We're out of here. So and then you pull pitch. So yeah, it's a sequence of events that has to happen. It has to happen all the time. In the Army, it's you can't skip certain portions. Like when you do your machine gun, you got to make sure that thing is going to be able to fire. So when you do it, clean your gun at night or during the day, whatever. When you take it apart, you make sure everything functions. Because if not, you don't go be in dire straits. So it's very important that we use a checklist.
Could you describe a typical day as a crew chief in Vietnam? Kind of thinking about how many times you flew or assisted the plane, etc.
Depends what your duty was for that day. Now, the pilots were plentiful. We just our job was to take off all the covers of the inlets and stuff like that, stow all that stuff, check the machine gun, hook up the ammo to the machine guns, you know, and you check all the levels in the engine, everything, make sure all the old levels were good. Now you prepared your aircraft that night. You had already checked it over. You look at it again, make sure during the night nobody sappers or nobody got to it. So you check out the aircraft, make sure you don't have no holes and stuff like that. You check all, and make sure everything is ready to go. When you take off some of the covers, and you put the covers back on and everything else, and then the pilot comes, and the pilot gets over. Is ready to go? Yep. He said okay. So he goes and gets his checklist, and he said, okay, I'm going to do the outside. So he goes over and checks the rotor blades and stuff, stabilizer bar up there, and then, he checks, make sure it's working. He looks in the engine, make sure all the engine's there, and checks the levels. He does this, what he calls a pre-flight. And see, we call it a daily inspection. His is a little bit shorter, more condensed, but he does a pre-flight. But he's already depended on you to make sure that everything was right. See, so we depend on each other, and it's a team effort. It's all a team effort. Everybody knows what they got to do, And sometimes he'll come and tell you, "You go fly left seat today." Okay. So when he tells you that, you go try to find somebody to fly the other gun, because you don't want to go with just no one gun. It gets a little too dangerous, But, it's a little funny how all that happens, but sometimes you find out that it's kind of the same way when you're married, Certain things you do, that you do and certain things your wife do, Your wife cooks, clean the house. You go out there, wash the cars, fix the washing machine, you fix the whatever broke, it's kind of like the same way, and you don't have a checklist or anything, but it's kind of like the same scenario over and over. It always plays out like that.
Kind of moving on to a different tone of questions. First off, did you ever come under enemy fire while flying?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the inevitable. It's going to happen, because the problem with us is sometimes we fly treetop, or what we call NOE, nap of the earth. You try to fly nap of the earth because the enemy sits in the jungle, or sometimes out in the open areas, depends. But if people think of Vietnam as a complete 100% jungle, it's not like that. It's no different than here. You got the trees, and then you got open areas and stuff like that, and you got buffalo grass and elephant grass, and you all these kinds of grasses that grow there. But it is funny how when you fly NOE, you do maybe 100 knots over the treetops, so they can hear you. And they know where they think that you know where you're coming from, but you really don't. They really don't know where you're coming from. So by the time they sense that you're coming, you already passed them. Oh, see, so we try to catch them, but that's the element of surprise. Because if you fly too high, that's not good. You fly too high, and it depends on the area where you're at. There is some real hot areas that you never flew, over 100 feet above the trees. You flew NOE. And there are some areas that you get closer to the coast. If you want to fly right on the beach, you can fly right on the beach. And it's not a problem, because if there's enemy out there, you can see them, so. But yeah, it's some terrifying moments.
If you could you describe the most dangerous mission you flew?
I think that, as far as I'm concerned, the most scared that I ever was, I think, and I wasn't really scared, I was concerned, because me and Mr. Kirksey, Oprah Winfrey's pilot, took off one day in a Huey, just me and him, and we're going to Da Nang to pick up some part at Da Nang. And I already been there like 9 months. I didn't have very much to go. He didn't either. And so we got the aircraft started, and I said, Mr. Kirksey, it's dark today. Benny is very dark. Oh, man. I said, we're going to hover out here. We don't have a horizon. I know. He said, it's going to take both of us. I said, okay. So we got out of the revetment, pulled out onto the taxiway. And we could see the lights here because we have lights. But see, Vietnam didn't have lights. The Vietnamese people could not use lights at night. Most of their lights in the city or wherever you were, in their huts or wherever they lived, they couldn't use that much electricity because there was none. So they had to, I don't know if there was allotted so much electricity or what, but it was dark and there was no moon that night. It's a moonless night. And we couldn't find a horizon. And so, but we took off anyway. He says, I'm going to have to fly on this with me. He says, if we get some horizon. I said, okay. I said, well, I'll keep watch for you. He said, all right. So I could watch the instruments and stuff because I couldn't see outside. It was so dark. So we're flying, but everything we're flying, but everything is instruments. The direction you're going, how fast we're going, our altitude, everything is on instruments. And then he got a little bit tired after about 30 minutes. And he says, okay, Benny, you want to take it? I said, okay, I got aircraft. So I took over the aircraft. And the window is open a little on the Huey. We're flying on the Huey. The window's up a little bit. He looked out the window. He looked toward the east side. He said, come on, son. We're looking for the sun because we had to brighten it up a little bit because it was so dark. It was probably one of those very terrifying experiences that I had to fly on nothing but instruments for about 30 minutes. And not exactly terrifying, but my heart would skip a beat, because I had to constantly be looking at the instruments, making adjustments, but you don't know what's out there. But I learned how to do it, so it was all right. But it was terrifying moments. Yeah, not somebody shooting at you. You were flying in the dark.
Did you ever have to make a crash landing or an emergency landing?
Yeah, we made one crash landing. The only one that I can recall we lived through. We lost our tail rotor effectiveness. Yeah. We didn't have a tail rotor. And so we crashed in a place called Benoit. We were a place down there called Benoit, and the pedals didn't work. So the pilot had to control everything with the throttle. See, everything was controlled by the throttle. So we did it. And on a rotation to the runway, we just kind of what's called melted the skids. We just hit that runway and it skidded real light on the skid until it come to a stop because we couldn't control the direction of it. But we did all right.
You kind of talked about this a bit earlier, but whenever you took over the platoon, how did your background in the infantry help you kind of train and teach your new troops?
And what helped me is that I used to see our platoon sergeant, our first sergeant, when they were talking, you would say, how many are you going to have out here? How many are you going to have out there? How many are you going to need? What are we expecting tonight? They used to use a term called, what do you think the weather's going to be? In other words, do you think we're going to get attacked or not? And I was not a guy that with the infantry to go out there and chase people like some of the infantry guys did, like 4th Infantry Division or 25 ID. Those guys chase people. Our job was to guard this plantation. That was our job. So I didn't have to go chasing anybody through the jungle. Ours was kind of a stationary deal. But their expertise in setting us up, I learned from that because I kind of was interested in what they were doing. Some guys could care less. But to me, I thought the more I learned, the better off I'd be. And so when I went back to the aviation and I took over that platoon, in my mind, I already know, how many aircraft are assigned to me. I got 8 helicopters. Okay. How many guys do I have? This. Okay. We're going to have a mission for this. We're going to need 4 aircraft. Okay. Who am I going to send? And a lot of the guys, see, when you fly, you get flight pay. All these guys get flight pay. Now, everybody working towards their wings, because you get wings, and now they give them to you. Before, you had to have 25 aerial combat missions to get a set of wings. so all these guys, they wanted to fly, so they can get their wings. And so you had to tell them, okay, who did I have on the last trip? There was this guy, this guy, this guy. Okay, so I'm going to send John here, and I'm going to send Missy over here. So you start sorting it out in your mind what you're going to do. And so once they get ready, you go out there and check. You got all the aircraft on side ready to go, and everybody's out there, and you're out there watching to make sure that all the aircraft are starting up at the same time and everybody's all right. So, I'm standing out there. As soon as they hover out, they look at me, they go like this, so good to go. So I just check them out there. Once they're gone, I go back to what I was doing, But I think invariably it was a learning experience for me, the infantry, to be able to allocate the resources that you have at hand to be able to complete your mission.
Were you ever responsible for evacuating wounded soldiers?
But
For evacuating wounded soldiers?
we had a company that we supported called the 498th Medivac, and I forgot to tell you that I did participate with them in the dust-off. They used to call it a dust-off unit. They had a Red Cross on them, which was also one of our units that was supported at that same place called Duckville. The 164th was here and the 498th Medivac was here, and we supported both of those units. So you could be working on this aircraft or on this aircraft. The guys that they send out there. I don't know how many guys. It was a few of us from the unit, because they lost like 32 people on that rocket attack, and so the 498th was called a dust-off. It was 2 words, dust and off. And it was called dedicated, unhesitating service to our fighting forces. That's the medevac call, and dust off. So whenever you wanted somebody to come pick somebody up, you say, I need a dust off. So instead of saying medevac, say dust off. Now the dust off initially did not have any weapons attached to them, because you're not supposed to shoot them. That was according to the Geneva Convention of 1954. You do not shoot at an aircraft that's got a red X on it. The red X being on the side is ambulance, so leave the ambulances alone. Later on in the combat, they put guns on them because, like I said, the NVA or the BC didn't care about that. They were not educated enough to know the difference. So, yeah, we picked up a few casualties here or there, all the time. There's just, even if you're just flying across one place and they're calling for dust off, so you're there, you go help whenever you can, or if somebody's getting hit, you go help them chase them out, and clear the area.
I know you mentioned that you had a period of time, maybe a year, back in the States post-Vietnam. What made you choose to return to the military for Korea?
Well, so I can recall that far back. What had happened, I met my wife, Isabel, and she was going to nursing school, and I thought she was pretty cool. And I said, oh, man, so I got myself into college, and we bought a house. I went to work for the government there in Corpus Christi at the Naval Air Station, working as a helicopter mechanic. And they hired me right away because they knew I was a helicopter mechanic already. So they didn't have to train me. I had to train most of them when I got there because they hired people off the street that didn't know how to do that. So, but that, and so I met a really nice man from here from Austin. He was with the National Guard, and that was in 1971. 1971. I had a period where I got out and I wanted to go join the band again with my brothers-in-law, playing the band and stuff. But as I told you in the beginning, I did smoke. I did smoke. I did not drink. And so I went over there with them and tried to be a band member again. But these guys had to smoke dope before they play. I didn't even drink. So needless to say, I ain't smoking no dope. So then I wanted to be a police officer. So my friends came back from Nam, joined PD. And so Richard, a friend of mine, and Raul, they told me I was a quarter inch too short. I had to be 5'8". Oh, man. I said, okay. So Raul told me, go see a chiropractor. He came by the house in his motorcycle, cop motorcycle, and he said, need to go over and get you extended. And then as quick as you get extended, go back over there and get measured. I said, no, man, I don't want to cheat. I said, I should have to do that. So, but I already had a job working for the federal government. And so here comes this guy from, he was a major back then. And he was a facility commander for the National Guard, where they have all the helicopters here in Austin. So he kept telling me about it. He said, man, I could use a guy like you. He said, man, you got all the Vietnam experience and stuff. He said, shoot. And he had interviewed me, and he knew I could fly and stuff, and he kind of liked that. He said, yeah, and you run up aircraft by yourself here? I said, yes, sir. He says, yeah, Lee. He says, how'd you get out? So I just got a certificate because one of the guys used to fly with me in Vietnam, Mr. Allen from Tennessee. Mr. Allen was working there at CCAT as a test pilot. And so he knew that I knew how to do that. So he was my life-saving buddy. He was taking care of me. And he told this major, he said, oh, hell, this guy can fly probably better than you can. So he said, I need you to come work for me. About the third time he told me that. I said, you know what? I said, how much do you guys pay over there? He said, well, just a minute. Do you guys want to pull out this piece of paper? Kind of old style guy, right? He said, okay, listen. You come to us. I'm going to hire 10 mechanics. Okay? It's wage grade 10, step 1. Okay? He says, but if you come to work with your experience, your expertise, he said, I'm going to hire as a wage grade 12, step 3. How much did he pay? And he told me, I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, that's what we pay. I said, oh my God, that was 3 times what I was making there in Corpus. I said, oh God. I said, well, I just enrolled at the university here. I said, I just bought a house. I've been there probably 2 months. He said, my little baby girl is about 4 months old. I said, I got a lot of things worked against me. He said, well, I'll tell you what. You come to Austin. He says, I'll make sure to give you time off to go to school in the afternoons. He said, if you can't sell your house, he said, the National Guard will buy it from you and put it for sale. I said, okay. And I said, how do I know you can pay me that much? He says, very easy, I'm the boss. You are? He said, yeah. I said, oh my God. I said, well, can you kind of jot those figures down here for me? So put all that stuff down. And I said, well, he said, well, let me give you another little interview. So we went to this great big latrine, what they call a latrine at the big hangars. So we went to the tree. He was asking me all these questions and stuff. He said, I've already hired 2 guys, 2 Vietnam vets. He said, to work on Huey's. He said, you're going to be my 3rd one. I said, okay. So I went home and told Isabel, I said, what? I said, better get ready. Get ready for what? We're moving. And she was a nurse. She could get a job anywhere. She worked here at St. David's. And he said, why are we moving? So I told her how much we money. He said, how do you know that? So I called him on the phone. I said, how much you tell me you're going to pay me? He said, I'll pay you this much. I said, how much is my next increase? He said, you'll be here for 6 months. I'll give you another pay raise. You stay for another year. After that, I'll give you another pay raise. I said, oh, Lord have mercy. So I told my father-in-law, my daughter was the first grandchild. He got mad. He said, what are you going to move to? I said, what is the matter with you? I said, you already got a government job here and everything. He had retired from there. And I said, I'm not staying here. This is how much they pay me. And I said, I'm going to go back and join the National Guard. He said, you're crazy. The old World War II guy. So he was mad at me, but I didn't care. I said, I'm going to Austin. And he said, okay. So I called him and said, okay. I said, I made a decision. I'm going to come with you. He said, all right. He said, tell you what. Let me go, before you make all that, let me go pick you up and bring you to Austin, let you see the facility and everything else. I said, okay. And I wore a flight suit over there because I had to run up the helicopter. So I wore a flight suit and a helmet. So he came to Corpus, picked me up, and brought me over here, and we landed. And took me to his office, and introduced me to some of the pilots that were there. Hey, how you doing? And everything else. You going to join us? Oh, yeah, I think I will. And well, Mr. Allen over there in Corpus Christi was mad at me because I left him. But I told him I said, we're going to pay me. And he said, that's to your advantage. He says, think about it. You might want to go to flight school while you're there. I said, well, yeah. I said, I just have my GED. I said, I need to get at least 2 years of college and then probably, I'll think about going to flight school. He said, well, that'll be fine. So I said goodbye to him and I left him in Corpus. I came to Austin, and true to his word, he gave me a job. He also had a band here, he had a country western band. Yeah, and he played the old place, Soap Creek Saloon and all the stuff up in Lamar. He is a band leader, and he was a singer and played guitar, and he was a pilot, heck of a statesman, a heck of a guy. But it just so happens we got here, and then I don't want to be offensive to anybody, but all the guys that worked here in Austin that worked for him were all white guys. And these guys, none of them had been to Vietnam. None of them had been in the regular army. They joined the Guard to keep from going to Vietnam. So, of course, we're going to call them draft dodgers, right? But that was the truth then. We didn't mean to imply that they didn't want to do their job. I never had any idea that they didn't want to do that. I just knew that they paid off some legislature, and the legislator would get them a job there at the facility, and so they wouldn't have to go to combat. And Richard North, one of my friends, told me one day, he says, well, it could have been worse. I could have joined the Boy Scouts. So, you guys ain't very far from the Boy Scouts. They were not. Terrible soldiers. Terrible, terrible soldiers. They were just... And they had the Korean War helicopters, all the old helicopters. I didn't even know how to work on those helicopters. They were so old. But they did. But they didn't know how to work on Huey. So our job was to allocate some of our time to be sure to train these guys. I trained them so well. One of the guys that I trained to be a helicopter mechanic later on went to flight school, became a warrant officer, and 8 years later he came back, became my boss over here. I trained him real well. His name was Donald McDonald. But it was you know but the last guy he hired three guys and they were all Hispanic. You know, we're Vietnam guys. What do you want? You know, we're Hispanic. That's what we do. You know. Well, one guy, and I won't tell you his name because he didn't like it. But anyway, he was from Brenham, Texas. Tall, skinny guy. He was mad because now I'd been there maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months. And every time the boss wanted to go on a trip, go somewhere to Amarillo, back to Corpus, or we'd go to Springfield, Missouri, or Biloxi, Mississippi, or Gulfport, Mississippi, I would go with him because I had my little toolbox ready and no helicopter breaks down, I can fix it. You know, no problem. I can fly with him too. You know. So instead of taking another pilot, he would just take me. And so we went all over the place. And finally, he got mad. He got really mad. Because he says, oh, ever since you all got here, you know, you all think that you all can take. I am taking over nothing, buddy. I just do as I'm told. And we were the same rank. At that time we were, because, you know, we worked under the accepted service, which was you wore a uniform, yet you were getting paid by the Federal Civil Service. So when you retire from two jobs instead of one. You retire as a soldier, retire from the Federal Civil Service. So that's why they call it the accepted service. But you have to wear a uniform. I didn't care for being in uniform. Cut my hair. That's all right. Cut my hair off. I didn't care. When I was getting paid, I was happy. And so he got mad. And so, and it's the, you know, I hadn't been there maybe 6 months. So Manuel had been there maybe a year. Pete had been there maybe 10 months. And so he started talking a little bit trash, and I kind of got annoyed a little bit. I said, wait a minute, buddy, you know, I don't hire these people. You don't, the boss does, you know. He said, well, you know, I don't appreciate, you know. Well, anyway, word got to him, and the boss called us all together, and we got to the mess hall, and all of us were sitting there. And he got mad, and first thing out of his mouth, I don't want nobody to talk until I'm done. Okay. So my boss's name was Douglas Hullum. Doug Hullum was one heck of a nice guy. He said, okay, we got a problem, I'm gonna fix it today. So y'all won't have any problem anymore. He said, I don't like the way this is going. There's some animosity here. He said, so I'm gonna fix it. And I hated to be right in the middle of it, you know, but I kind of got used to it. He says, all right, I went and hired Benny. His wage grade 12, step 2. You know why I hired him at that rate? Because none of you in here have 600 flying hours in combat. He does. I flew 575 hours in combat. And he says, and he's an infantry guy. But we can learn something from him. He said, and he can fly. Most of y'all, except for Richard Norton, none of y'all can fly. He says, did I get something for what I pay him? He said, absolutely. Now, he just happens to be Hispanic and you guys don't like it. He said, well, I'm sorry about that. He says, I didn't hire him because he's brown. I hired him because of expertise. He says, and you guys can complain all you want to. I'm not going to change a thing because that's the way I want it to be because I'm the boss. And so And he asked this guy, he said, okay, you're the one that's parlaying all this stuff out there about what I'm doing. He said, look, you don't have to put up with me. He said, I got a friend right here, right down the street. He said, we're Sears and Roebuck. He said, runs the tire shop over there. He said, he can give you a job busting beats real quick if you don't like the way I do things. He said, and mind you, I don't ever want to hear this stuff again about who I selected for who. He's going to fly with me because he can fly, and I can leave the pilots here so he can do their training. He said he can fly and that he can fix the aircraft, so I'm taking him with me. And if you don't like it, that's tough shit. That's what he told me. And another thing, if I tell you the chicken can pull a freight train, you hook him up. Okay. And then he asked that guy again, you got anything to say? No, sir. Okay, good. Don't disrespect these people. And it went away. I was with him the other day. Not my boss. My boss has passed. But I was with this guy that complained. He says, well, this was about last September, I think it was. Last September, we went to lunch. All of us that worked together went to lunch at a place called Wahlberg near Georgetown. And we met out there. And I said, well, why would it compel you to say that? I don't know, man. I was young and stupid. And I come from Brenham. I was a redneck. That's okay. But after all these years, he was telling me, he said, you know, I don't appreciate he treated me like that, but he was right. He said, I learned from that. I said, yeah, I mean, you got to treat people for who they are, you know. He said, I've learned that now. He said, that was a long time ago. but it's funny how, you know, things can turn for you, you know, but you yourself have got to do what you have to do, what you have to do to make yourself a part of the team. See, you don't want to be a part of the team. And there are some guys that, you know, that, oh no, man, that's a white guy. They ain't gonna go with that. Well, you don't have to, you know. Or black guys because they're black. I remember the National Guard was very different coming to work for the Guard because to me they were a bunch of Boy Scouts. They didn't know how to do anything. They didn't know how to read map. They barely do anything about their weapon. They didn't wear their uniform properly. I mean, it was horrible. I never seen anything like that. And so I called Doug one day and I said, you know, Colonel, I don't like this. I said, why do we let him do that? He said, well, we shouldn't. I said, we have to live by one regulation. Yep. He says, well, you're the first sergeant now. He says, maybe you could help. I said, well, I've tried. And they told me, you're not a first sergeant here. You're just a worker like the rest of us. I said, and they're right. I'm just a worker like they are. I wear a uniform. I said, I'll rank them. But it doesn't matter. I said, you know, these guys just, they want to do what they want to do. Said, well, I don't know what to tell you. But he says, keep working on it. He says, well, sooner or later, they'll come around. I said, okay. So one day, Mr. Smith goes to the gas station in his T-shirt and wearing his trousers and boots. And his hat is on backwards. Gas station pumping gas. Car outside, and there's an Army captain there from Fort Hood. Fort Cavazos now, but back then it was Fort Hood. He says, ask him if he's, are you a member of our armed forces? He said, yep. Where do you work? He said, I work at the aviation facility. He says, and they let you come out dressed like that? I'm a civilian today. I'm not an Army. He said, well, where's your coat and jacket? He says, oh, we don't have to wear it. We just wear whatever we want. Somehow that captain got a hold of somebody. They got a hold of somebody. They got a hold of somebody. They got a hold of somebody. By the time we got back to our aviation facility, oh boy, it done blown up big time. And Mr. Cardwell at the time, warrant officer, he was our maintenance officer. He was fuming. He just got his butt ringed by one-star general and a colonel and a lieutenant colonel. And so he says, tomorrow morning, effective tomorrow morning, if you want to come to work at this facility, he said, I want you to wear your uniform like Benny and Warren Frederick. And if you can't look like that, don't bother coming to work. And everybody said, well, what happened? Well, it just so happened they had given my friend some days off without pay because he was grossly out of uniform. Not only that, he was disrespectful to an Army captain who happened to be an aviator too. So we got in trouble and started changing little by little after that. They had to learn to adapt and to overcome. They were real slow. But I think we finally turned that big machine around after about 3 or 4 years. Everybody got back in uniform. And we're doing good. They're doing fantastic nowadays. Now they're intermingled with the active Army and my daughter's stepson. I sent him to flight school a while back, and he's flying Blackhawks for the Army. And he just got back from Germany. He's stationed here at Fort Colosso, so that made me feel better. At least, I saved one of my grandson. And so, it's a very different world. I think it's adapted well. I think the Army has adapted well to the changes. I remember when I always wanted to be a first sergeant. After I became a first sergeant, I focused on being a command sergeant major because I knew I could get ahead. So I knew I had to get my education. So I said, well, I had to get that first. So I got that. I joined just several organizations, and I said, I think it'd be good for me to belong to this organization. Know some people, more professional than a helicopter mechanic. So I became the supervisor there, the foreman. I had all the allied traits of the people, the sheet metal guys, the engine guys, the skid guys, all the other guys. They were not crew chiefs. They were just material guys that worked on the aircraft itself. That could fix a hole in the helicopter, stuff like that. I had all those guys. Well, I had to hire a guy that was an engine shop guy because I only had 3 and I needed 1 more. So I got some applications in and I looked at them, and I said, I've got 5. I'm going to interview them all. I interviewed them all. 1 was a Hispanic guy, 3 white guys, and 1 was black. We had no blacks, no females. And but I started talking to this guy. His name was Lee, and I thought he was fantastic. His answers were fantastic, and I liked the way his uniform looked. And I said, he could. He was well versed. He was. I asked him a little bit about Army training, and see if he knew his stuff about Army training, not just as a mechanic on engines, but overall soldiering skills. And he was fantastic. I'm going to hire this guy. So I went and told my colonel that I was going to hire this person. He said, oh, fantastic. Hired him. And Mac comes into my office and said, Benny, this guy you hired here, is he black? I said, yeah, he's black. And he says, why'd you hire a black guy? I said, Mac, he's the best one of the bunch. Are you sure? I said, I'm positive. Just like I trained you. I said, that's the way this guy is. He wanted to learn. I said, he's learned a lot. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Go ahead, do that. But if it doesn't work out, I will come back to see you. I said, you do that. You do that. A year later, maybe a year, I don't know. He said, Benny, I'll see my office. All right. So I went over there and sit down. He said, you want some water? Yeah. To grab some water. He said, how's everything going? Oh, it's going pretty good. I'm doing this. He said, you know, I called you in here for something. I said, what am I going to get you out for? He said, on the contrary, I got to hand it to you. He said, what? He said, you know, yesterday I walked into the engine shop. I said, okay. And I was expecting something else, like, oh, your person was asleep or something. I walked to that shop. He said, Benny, you could eat off that damn floor. It is so clean. He said, let me check his regs. He said, oh, his regs, his checklist, everything, his toolbox, everything's in perfect condition. Everything is marked. He said, I'm impressed. So what did I tell you? I said, you ought to see his soldiering skills. I said, he runs circles around some of this guy. Said, really? I said, yeah. He just happens to be black, Mac, but he's a soldier. I said, but he's a fantastic soldier. He said, man, I apologize. He said, I'll take it back. You're absolutely correct. So, and we hired this guy, and he stayed with us until he retired. And he never wavered. He was a professional to the end, you know. And I always appreciated it. That's why I kind of like treat people that way, because I think it's important that you give them credit for what they know and what they are, not the color of their skin, you know. So, I don't know. Maybe I believe in Martin Luther King. But yeah, that's the way it was. I never had a problem with anybody. It was because of the color of their skin, and we always, you know, if I didn't like that person, I just didn't like them. That's just it. Period. It didn't matter who they were. You know, there was never many of them. Only one guy I ever had a fight with in the National Guard, and he was a lieutenant colonel. But he had a tendency to call us Hispanics changos. Hey, that didn't fly. And I wasn't the one to complain. It was Warren Frederick that complained. And we were both command sergeant majors. And he told that colonel, he says, you know what? He says, that is a derogatory statement. I said, why, you don't like it? No, I don't like it. He said, well, what you going to do about it? So it's okay. So we kept walking on the hall, and Freddie says, Benny, I said, I'll take care of it. So one day, a guy that worked for him used to run my motor pool. I was a first sergeant, right? And we're going to to Fort Polk, Louisiana. I need 37 vehicles ready to go. And so I went and told him about a month before. And I said, I need you to get these vehicles ready because I need 37 vehicles. He said, well, I ain't going to have them. I said, what, if you ain't going to have them, you better start working on it down. Because I got to have 37 vehicles to take the unit to Fort Polk. We were going to convoy. See, and CC was a civilian too. He was a staff sergeant, not a first sergeant, but he worked actually on drill weekend, Saturday and Sunday. He worked for me, you know. And Joe, the commander, was here. Well, but during the week, he worked for Timmy Hines. Timmy Hines worked in the office as a brigade officer in charge of the office while everybody's gone, you know. So I went over there because he got mad at me and he wanted to come see me, so he called me on the PA system. So I went over there and I said, what you got? And he got up from behind his desk. He's mad. He's red. He's so mad. This is a guy that's from Eagle Pass, Texas. And he's mad behind his desk, and he's almost spit because he's so mad at me. If you ever go back there and chew on my guys again, he said, I'm going to have your stripes and everything. I said, you going to what? So I said, I told him I need 37 vehicles, and I don't give a crap how he does it. He gets me 37 vehicles for that convoy. What else is to do? I said, I told him his evaluation will show that if he does not. He says, well, why didn't you come to me? What? I said, I'm his first sergeant. Why am I going to come to you? And he said, because I run the show, dude. I said, you know what? Time out. I said, okay. I'm a WS-12, step 10 right now. WS-10, I'm 12, step 10. You're a GS-9. Now, are you talking to me like a lieutenant colonel and I am a sergeant major? Or are you talking to me like a civilian and I'm a civilian? Which way is it? He said, well, I'm a civilian. I said, so am I. I said, you know what? Kiss my ass. I don't got to talk to you. I walked out of his office. When the new general took over, and I went to work for the general as his command sergeant major, he says, I want you to do is give me a list of all the officers that you think that we need to remove. He was number one on the list, and I was there. The general's here, I'm there, and he's over there. And the general's telling him he's going to release him. So he didn't get promoted to colonel. He's a lieutenant colonel. And he said, well, sir, I'm doing so much. And the general very unwaveringly told him, I don't need your kind. He says, I know what you think of me. Somebody told me. The general happened to be black. He was Chappie James from World War II, had a son. His name was Daniel James, and he was our commander, 3-star general. I said, okay. He says, unfortunately, that's the way it is. And we're shutting down some of his positions, and we need to change some of the positions. He says, but I also know that you think that my command sergeant major here is a chango. He says, that's contract on becoming an officer. So you got 30 days, vacate. Give me your, he says, and if you don't resign, you don't give me your retirement, I'm going to fire you. Well, he left. So me and the general talking about this and that, and he said, okay, I take care of number one. He said, okay, the other one is, I said, the other one is, okay. What transpired on that one? So I explained to him. He said, okay. All right. The other one had a problem with females. He told me one time the worst thing we ever did was let women become part of this army. I didn't need to hear that. But anyway, when I went outside, an hour and a half later, this guy's in the parking lot waiting for me. And he's smoking a cigarette. Because he was a chain smoker. And he's already going, and all this big, words, and I'm going like, and that's probably why you're no longer going to be a member of our army, Colonel Hines, is because you don't know how to control your anger. I said, you don't act like an officer. I said, I've seen some lieutenants that handle a being a lieutenant better than you. I said, I've seen some officers get chewed out by a colonel. I said, they just sit there and say, 3 bags full, sir. But you, on the other hand, you think everybody else is below you. Now, take you back a few years ago. Did you call me a chango in front of Sergeant Major Frederick? Didn't appreciate it. I said, then you jumped all over me because you thought you outranked me as a civilian. I said, you don't outrank me as a civilian. You don't outrank me now either because I work for the general, not for you. I said, and that's one of the reasons why you've got to go. We are going in different directions. I ain't taking this National Guard to be a part of the Army. I said, you bringing us back down. It ain't going to work. You don't want to join us? You're out of here. And he was cussing me up like you wouldn't believe it. He can cuss in Spanish because he's from Eagle Pass. So he was, but got rid of him too.
So the sergeant or the command sergeant major, kind of what is that position?
That is what they call an E9. That is the highest enlisted rank in the military. There is nothing higher than an E9. Now, an E9 goes through different, what we call a birth. You start as an E9 at the lieutenant colonel level. You work for a lieutenant colonel, or he's an advisor. Then you move up to a brigade, which would be a colonel position, a full bird colonel position. Then you move into a 1-star position. Then you move into a 2-star, and so on up the road. Until you get to be the command sergeant major of the Army. And very few of us ever get there. And I know I was one of them. But I went before a board to become a command sergeant major as an advisor to a commander when in 1988, I was selected to apply for this position in Dallas, Naval Air Station with the Chinook Battalion. And I must have done a good job because it was 13 of us the whole weekend came before a board. And one question saved me that I answered the question correctly and I won the whole thing. So I became a CSM then. And the following, I was selected to go to Kosovo. And my friend Warren Frederick had never been there. So, and normally the commanders want somebody with combat experience as a command sergeant major because you've got to advise them on this and that and this, And so Warren had never been there. So he says, I'd like to go, Benny. He said, you need to talk to the commander? I said, yeah. He said, you going down, man. I don't need to go. Okay. So I talked to the commander. The commander says, yeah. I said, you'll be happy with Sergeant Major Frederick. He's fantastic. He said, okay, good. Well, the following time we were going to go to Bosnia. And I had another guy, my Aggie buddy, John Brown, was going to be the commander. And he said, Sergeant Major, I want you to go with me. And I said, well, sir, I don't know. But Sergeant Major Danner had never been to combat either. These are the traditional Guard guys I'm telling you about, And now they were command sergeant majors. So now they wanted to go. So I asked John Brown if he wouldn't mind taking James Danner. I said that would be because he had never been and he was a little combat on his record before he retires. Yeah, sure, no problem. You sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. I don't want to go to Boston. All right. I got to Boston anyway, but anyway, he went over as the command sergeant major. So that's our job, is to advise a commander of what is coming up 72 hours from now. You got to prepare your commander for that, and you actually brief him. And you talk to him 3 or 4 times a day as to what we're looking at, what we're doing, what we got to do, and where's our training program, who's doing what to whom and how. And this guy's getting what they need as far as food and training and all these things. Are we keeping up with this? Are we keeping up with that? What about our safety program? There's a lot of things that you have to be on top of, especially regulation. Because the first thing the commander is going to ask you, Sergeant Major, what regulation covers this? and you better know it. You better have it in your head. So it's a very dedicated position. Uh, it's it'll wear you down. Yeah, we are held in high esteem by many colonels, generals, and I was fortunate enough to work for Chappie James's son, and Chappie James was the World War II pilot, and he was an ace pilot for Tuskegee Airmen, and got a chance to go to Tuskegee Institute in Alabama with my boss to go and meet. I met General Davis, who was one of the ace pilots in World War II. I think he took out 13 fighters or something like that. And all these guys were black, so you gotta have some respect for them, even though, I think at one time I watched a movie called Red Tails. It's about the Tuskegee Airmen and how many people they lost. And but they said they would never learn to fly because they were black. Geez, like saying, Amelia Earhart can't learn to fly because she's a female. I'm like, come on. But yeah, they're held in high regard as far as I'm concerned, because they did a heck of a job for the United States. And they knew that, because what guy in that movie turns around and he's in a bomber, the B-17 bomber, and he turns around and sees over there, and he looks again and says, he's looking at the pilot waving at him, and it's a black guy sitting in the P-51 Mustang, and he's going, oh my God. He'd never seen that before. So when they got to the ground, they sent a guy over and told him, get those guys over here, all those pilots over here, come and have a drink with us. They bought him drinks. See, that's how aviation is. Aviation is kind of helped in that respect. Everybody's an aviator. They all get along. That's good. It's a good Army story, huh?
So as we start to kind of wrap up here, how has serving our country changed your outlook on life?
It's funny how if you had told me 60 years ago, that I would have this kind of life now, I don't think I'd ever believe you, because as I told you, I grew up in a little one-room shack with 14 brothers and sisters, and we used to sit and sleep in the old station wagons that my dad had on the yard. And it's a very different world. We've had a lot of opportunities. We left the block, and some of us in our family went to college, some did not. And some graduated from college, and some did not. But that's okay. But, it was an unbelievable thing that I would envision this kind of world 60 years later. Never in my mind, we thought about it, and it said, well, that's just the way life is. And I was 15 years old, and I was sanding cars at this Rambler dealer in Corpus Christi, sanding the paint on it so the painter could paint them. And it was hard work, and it was dusty and hot. And I said, oh my God, what am I doing? How am I going to get out of this? So I proceeded to do whatever I did. And a couple of days later, I think about that again. And I had a sister that had I worked at that shop for a while. And then I had a sister who just graduated from college. And she was afraid about this girl. Well, he said, you need to get out of here. So I joined the Army. And what a different world, It's very different. Very, very, very different, And we grew up with old cars, had no air conditioner, and my daddy was a mechanic. The damn cars didn't work. They had no windows, and it was just all a bunch of old cars. And I said, golly. Today I got a 5-bedroom house. That's good. Very different. But, you have to accept change. And you got to be willing to embrace change. And pull out your bootstraps and let's go. Let's go do something, And not sit on your laurels like you saw a lot of that in the neighborhoods of the old where guys would gather at the corner, just like you see in Chicago, gather at the corner, sit there and drink, 60-ounce Dr. Peppers and talking about what you might want to do, but you never do nothing about it. You just sit there and drink Dr. Peppers. I didn't do that. I didn't like that. I said, nope, I'm going to do something very different. And for the most part, coming to Austin was one of the best things I've ever done. Got a chance to go to school, and it's been good. It's been really, really good. I don't live in Westlake, but pretty close. I do have 2 acres out there, and a big house, and I've raised my daughter. She's already 50, and she never left home yet. She got married twice, didn't make it work. I raised my 2 grandkids. One of them's going to graduate now, and then the other one is in 8th grade. So, we've done good. We've done really well. So, no complaints. Life's good.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about today, Mr. Aleman?
No, I think I'd like to thank you all for, I know that sometimes I did EEO law, and sometimes I feel that there's some discrimination somewhere. I saw it happen, okay, and I know it happens, especially in the old guard, and I knew that there has to be some change. There has to be some acceptance somewhere. My family I call it a very distinguished family because they did things very different. We all got married. Some got married to Hispanics. Some there's white ladies. My sisters got married to white guys. And so when we went to my mother's house, like on Christmas, I call it a smorgasbord because we had food for everybody. All kinds of different. The people were now from all the way down south to all the way up north, to all the way to west coast to east coast. We come from everywhere, and we came together and melted as a pot. And my mother liked that. She thought it was great that everybody could get along, and she never envisioned something like that because of the way that she grew up. But you had to make that jump in where you just accept people for who they are, and I think that she decided later on, way when she was in her 80s already, that she was real happy with what her family had done. We all did good. My little brother came here to Austin. I brought him from Corpus Christi, and I brought him over there, and he was in deep trouble. So I brought him here. Today he's a land baron, and he worked here for UT. He retired from UT, but it can be done. You just got to put your prejudices aside and work with people and respect them for who they are. I think that'll work out better. That's all I got to say.
Many thanks, Mr. Aleman, for serving our country and for sharing your experiences
You're
with
very
us
welcome.
today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.